Hello all, I hope you're doing well today. I was having a chat this morning with a subscriber over on the Substack and he made some excellent suggestions with regards to content I could make. One of them being, how do modern men become good, traditional moral fathers in what is an increasingly broken and degenerate world? An excellent question. This is in relation to the 7 Steps calls that I'm doing as well. You may know I do the work on the 7 Steps with men, holding some free calls on that soon if you want to attend. Do join the Substack down below. You can join for free. And just let me know you want to come along. But a key part of it is going to be focusing on how do we be fathers, whether you're a father now or whether you are planning to be in the future. How do we bring together all of this knowledge to create good sons, good daughters? Now, I think the first thing to speak about here is why this question is so important, why I really respect the question from the man who asked it, because it shows that he's really at that crux point that I'm at in terms of my content and what I'm trying to deliver, which is moving away from being the son, looking up to our father, making peace with our father, and us becoming the fatherly figure, which is a massive step, And for some of us, that may come quickly. It may have already happened. For some of us, it might be down the line, 5 to 10 years. But we can all start planning for this stuff now, because it's probably going to be the most important thing you do in your life. And this journey from almost looking up to our parents and blaming them for us or the state of the world and moving away from that into the father position is huge. I think it was Jung who said, you'll never really grow up while you're still blaming your parents, because it sort of traps you in that adolescent mindset. And you do see that with many adults today. A lot of their identities are still rooted in opposition to their parents. That's actually very common. I remember that Simpsons joke years ago as well. Was it Ned Flanders, who's nothing wrong with him at all, but he goes bonkers, and then these psychologists are trying to figure out what's wrong, and he calls his parents lazy beatniks, and they're like, oh, it's all the parents' fault. And it is a bit of an overplayed cliche and overly psychologized culture. But the reason why that relationship is so strong is, in my view, especially with the father, is the spiritual relationship with the father as to why it's so powerful. And if we don't have that initiatory journey away from the mother, which is vital for men, we often stay in this confused, trapped place where we can never really mature. And this, of course, is another big aim of the 7 Steps. I think right now, Western-wide, that's happened pretty much to everyone. It's very hard for any of us to escape from that dynamic now because there are no initiatory processes. And even if they were, they get banned and poo-pooed, and aren't they evil because it's pro-masculine. But anyway, this very much feeds on from my Make Peace with Your Father video, and I think you can almost watch these two in tandem. If you do want to understand that side of things, of making peace with your father, that's really got to happen first. But presuming you're already aware of this, I think the first thing we have to be conscious of is when we do become fathers, that in a sense does bring us to peace with our fathers a little more, as long as the relationship isn't completely ruined. Because we do start to understand how hard it is to be a father. It's not easy. And it's very easy to say, oh, I lack this, I lack that. My dad, shouted at me this. He was physical with me at this time. It's very easy to say all that. But when you grow up yourself and you are a father, you do think, oh, wow, I can see the pressures my father was under. Not defending some of the actions that fathers do, don't get me wrong. But you do start to understand it in a new light. For instance, in my own experience of being a father, one of the things that was a really important one for me, and I would recommend as a starter you do this, write down 5 to 10 things that are just central for you in your fatherhood journey that are really important. One for me was to be stern, but also to be open and loving and kind, to feel that my son could say anything, but he'd also have that boundary. I think it's really important to remember that boundary. At the same time, another one for me that was super important was to be mindful of the nervous system of my son. I mean, my parents actually divorced when I was very young, so my early life with my father wasn't too bad. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it wasn't terrible. But he left when I was quite young, and my brother, I've said before, got mixed up in drugs, the wrong crowds, became hyper-violent. And that meant that I grew up in an environment that was extremely violent and scary. And it meant that my nervous system was constantly on edge. In fact, I used to prefer the violence because there was no more anticipation. You think, well, at least it's here. You don't have to wait anymore. It's the waiting that used to get me. And the waiting, why that bothered me is it's so bad for your nervous system. It's just like wringing out a towel just all the time, every day. And it was really damaging for me. When I had a kid, was very passionate this idea of not wishing for my child to go through that same experience that I went through. Because again, it led me into that fight or flight state. It meant that if I was out on Friday night and confrontation started in Leicester, I get into stupid scraps. If they were a lot bigger than tougher than me, I get very freaked out, because I just didn't know what to do, and I get all the reliving the trauma that I'd experienced at home. My nervous system was just shot and out of control. So I wanted to be sure that I wasn't going to affect my son's nervous system. But there have been times where me and my wife have had a voluble disagreement, Now, it's not like throwing plates, there's no violence, and it's not out of control or anything, but these are voluble disagreements in front of our son. And I know that I've fallen short there, I've failed. And I think the first thing to say about it is it's all right to fail. It's all right to fail. You're never going to get it 100% perfect. It's good to have your aims and your goals and try and work towards those, but you're never going to get them perfectly. And again, that does allow us to have peace with the world that bit more. The next thing to say with that is more of a personal one, and I had to realize this quickly. If I'm feeling guilty because I didn't meet a standard that I really wanted and I'm feeling sorry for my son, that's great, because the guilt is there as a sign for me to, try and work on that. And one thing me and my wife said was like, look, we really need to have like a code word to say, look, let's talk about this later. One of us just leaves the room. Whatever needs to happen so this situation doesn't, boil over. And, we 50-50 with that. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, but it's still an improvement. My point is, though, that if I'm still going to bed with that guilt 2-3 weeks later, that's always a sign that, there's a demon inside of you. If you can't let go, because the guilt was there for a reason. Yeah, you did something wrong. Acknowledge it, work on it, move forward. Repent, all that sort of stuff. Pray if you need to. Acknowledge it. Be honest with another man about it. Be honest with God about it. And once you've done that, you've got to move on. That's what repenting is. It's changing your ways. But if it's still, just playing in your mind, guilt goes over and over, there's something in there. It could be all manner of things. It might just be a demon that wants to rip you down. It might also be your own pride. Pride's a big one with men. In my experience, doing work with men, a lot of men who are depressed, deep down have a lot of pride. And we don't like to hear this in this modern age. No, I'm not. I'm depressed. It's all poor me. No, it's not. If you really break down depression a lot of the time, it's because guys think they should be higher and better than what they are. We sometimes have to dig very deep, and that's why God wants to humble us. And it can feel like God's punishing us. He's actually not. He's trying to dig deep down into all of the undergrowth, and then he can show you, you're full of pride. It happened to me, actually. I was always more anxious than depressed. But I remember telling this guy I was doing some of this men's spiritual work with once, my terrible childhood, now it was all so painful. And he said to me, you're quite self-obsessed. And I remember, how dare you? Or at least in my head, I thought that, And I remember walking home and I was thinking, I think he's right. Because I think about myself all the time. And if that person had been through what I've been through, and they've never lost family members like me, or they haven't been through the violence I had been through. And of course, once you start thinking, maybe I am self-obsessed, you start saying like, yeah, okay, maybe a lot of people haven't, but some people have been through a lot worse. And all things considered, you're not that bad. You're not that bad. You've got a working body, a working mind, half decent intelligence. You can earn some money, work hard, get a nice girlfriend. It's not that bad. And I had to get out of my own way a lot of the time. And again, that man, if you like, God was speaking through him to make me face myself there. But anyway, I'm going off on one a bit there. The core point that I think I really want to make in this video is the fundamental role of us as fathers should be modelled on, at least in my view, the idea of God the Father. Because that's the archetypal father, right? And the Christian tradition has a lovely explanation of this. God the Father, he's a sort of transcendent, mystical force of life that we can't really understand, That's why the great work of English mysticism is called the cloud of unknowing. You can't really know fully what God is in his totality. We can have sort of inklings and shards of what God's love is, but it's too great for us to really fathom. And sometimes when we get overwhelmed by that love, that's something like a mystical experience, the peace that passes all understanding, as Christ calls it. And of course, Christ is, in the Christian tradition, the sort of manifestation of the man that we follow. We follow his model. And again, as I'm very eager to point out, Christ isn't this feminized hippie walking through the desert, like, yeah, let's talk about, our emotions and LGBTQ. No, that's a modern bastardization. Christ is very direct, he's very loving, he's very kind, but he'll tell you what you need to be told. He's very brave, and he's very protective, and he puts his own life on the line at the end of the day for the whole of humanity. And in a sense, this is the model we follow in our family. So what we're looking to do is embody that behavior, and the first place that comes through is in the presence and the frame. It's got to be that frame which is rooted deeply in the spirit. That's where the stillness emanates, but it's also something which is rooted in the values of God. And again, as I'm very eager to express on the channel, there's something like that balance, that middle way, or sometimes expressed as the narrow way that we follow. But we're not getting too OTT with being like, oh, I'm so strong and masculine, and we're not going the other way by being like, yeah, everything's love. We're in the middle zone, where we can hold that line of a boundary, but there's also that space for the family to come into us. And of course, it's our role to love the family like Christ loved the church in the Christian tradition. But of course, we're not perfect like Christ. So again, through the lens of a Christian tradition, you have to make repentance. I referenced that earlier. If you've got something wrong, you've got to acknowledge it. It's not to embarrass you, it's to mark that process of repentance and allow your soul to be healed and to continue making the forward journey. Another thing that me and my wife have personally worked on is this idea of, there will be imperfections, and it's not actually the imperfections that matter within reason, so a falling out is going to happen. If I'm getting physical with it, that's going way over a line. Now, I never have, but I'm saying if I did, that would be a sign to me that I've got to really do some work. I mean, I know what that would be, but I've got to really, really start looking at myself if that was the case. As I say, it's not, but there have been arguments. And one thing that we've tried to focus on is, yes, trying to be conscious of the vulnerability of the arguments, but really trying to work on what our son and future children will see in terms of how we deal with those disagreements after, So one thing for my wife is not doing what modern feminists do, which is dressing down the man, humiliating, debasing. That's really toxic feminine behavior. And I think it goes without saying, I try and avoid any woman who does that to men. Now, if she's really trying to grow beyond that, I think that's fair enough, although I would still take caution. But that has got to be a bit of a no-no from the get-go if you're dating a woman and she does that sort of thing. I would just leave peacefully if things like that happen. So that's on her side. On my side, of course, you have a responsibility as a man, if you have a traditional model, that yes, you are the leader. And the leader does mean, that you have to make the executive calls. But with that, it's a responsibility of love, not ordering her around. Not like, well, I'm in control, so blah, 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 blah. You will turn into the tyrant king if you do that. And she will start to resent you, and your children will start to resent you. That story has 10 a penny with many folks. My father was domineering. And what you'll often get is people, when they have that experience, will superimpose that experience on the idea of masculinity, patriarchy, and so on. They'll think it's all evil because all they're getting, and the culture reaffirms this, is a feminine understanding of masculinity and masculine authority. They think that it's all just evil, when in reality, especially through the Christian tradition, what it is love, properly understood. But it's very difficult for men to maintain that anyway. But when you don't even have a tradition, you don't have God, it's even harder. So the point I'm making here is, the underlying dynamic that you've got to go into a relationship with that your children see, but also how you make up. That your children can see that you are actually capable of working through these things, that you are being still and allowing your wife's emotionality to be. If your son sees that especially, he will know how to deal with women in later life, because he'll realize, I've got to stay still. Now, it's hard to stay still, and sometimes I don't, but it's very good for boys to see that, because they'll learn a lot about the feminine nature, and also the feminine nature coming back, and feminine and masculine coming back to, if you like, one whole again. It's so important, this, because again, it can show them once more that the challenges the nervous system faces can be overcome and reintegrated. Now, this is, of course, inside the relationship, but I think when it comes to the basics of living the trad life, it's the obvious one. you're going to need a traditionalist basis to give you the coordinates to live upon. Now, for you, that depends upon what your tradition is. I'm assuming if you follow me, many of you might be Christians. I know there's a few pagans, there's some generic spiritualists, some secular guys who are perhaps atheists but are just interested. Well, you're going to need to find a tradition that you can at least broadly lean on. And Christianity is, of course, one that's immediately there for people. It's quite hard these days to embrace it because the church has become so liberalized and feminized. But there's a lot of wealth there if you go beyond that and dig deep into, basically everything pre-40 years ago. And even in the modern church now, there are still one or two figures out there who are doing some good work, especially online, actually. There's lots of good Catholics, Orthodox, even some in the Protestant world, although I'm a bit iffy towards that. But anyway, Anglo-Catholics aren't bad as well if you're more interested in the Anglo tradition, which has, in my view, largely been corrupted. But some of the Anglo-Catholics aren't too bad. But anyway, what I'm saying is, whether it's Christianity or something else that you're drawn to, you need to have that basis to give you the backbone as a man to know what you should lean on. And incidentally, as I've said before, I used to do a lot of work coaching men, running men's groups in London, and very often you're stumped with things, but it's so helpful to have the traditional understanding to lean on. Because say if I'm stumped with something, I can just say, well, do you know what? The Christian understanding says this, a Hindu understanding would say this, secular philosophical understanding this, and you're giving people very, very strong bastions to base themselves on there, which is beyond what I understand. And it's the same principle in parenting. We're relying on a wisdom that's much deeper than ourselves. So again, I think the trad basis is especially important. You don't have to have it all worked out, but I would start inquiring into what can guide you and give you those values that you ultimately are supposed to embody. And your son, ideally, will hopefully embody one day, and daughter too. Also, I think national traditions are very important, to be sure that our children are aware of these things. I think in European culture, one thing that is very unspoken, very subtle, and a lot of people don't realise is things like the leaving of nature as it was when you found it. It's sort of that idea. And even, you can get that whether we're actually out in nature and respecting the trees, respecting the wildlife, leaving nothing messy, rubbish, things like that, and almost a love for the natural world. And I think that actually is sort of the engine behind what we see of these lovely things you get out in the middle of nowhere in the English Shires, where you walk along and it will say, look, take some apples and just leave, a quid on the side, or take some eggs and put some money in the honesty box as much as you feel it's worth. And a lot of that stems from that, like not harming what's around us, trusting others, or at least trusting those who signify the same cultural norms as you. Because, of course, this really leads to the next one, which is we need to protect our children's innocence. And I aim to do that in as many ways as possible. Hollywood is corrupt. Pop music is completely corrupt. iPhones are going to give them access to the internet where they're going to see all sorts of things immediately. The bombardment from the leftist liberal media on children is insane and constant. So we have to understand they are going to see it. But still, I want to try and protect the innocence of my children as much as possible. For now, with our kid, that's meant no screens. And that's not going to be able to last forever, obviously. But it is a way of keeping them away from that media for as long as possible. And when I speak about innocence, what I ideally am going to do is try and be as clear as I can on different understandings and expressions of the world, especially the understanding of light and darkness. I speak about this a lot on the channel, but kids these days will be told by definition that, traditionalism is bad, liberalism is good. So I'm really going to be very clear and saying, yeah, do you know what? There are some points to that, because if you just challenge it immediately, that will mess up with their psychology. My teacher and the pop stars are telling me this though, and I really like them, but my mum and dad are telling me this. This is such a horrible thing to do to children because you're splitting their psyche and you could end up doing them real damage. In fact, I think lots of youngsters are really damaged because of this. But the point I'm making here is we have to be conscious of not embarking on that splitting process by being too tough, but allowing that explanation to be, but giving them, if you like, that understanding of the counter. So allowing both to be true simultaneously and them to grow with both until they're ready to drop one and really align with something which is more hearty and earthy. For instance, I'll say, when feminists say men are pigs, they beat women, aren't they all horrible? Yeah, no, you know what? That's really horrible when you get abusive men. That's disgusting. I'm not pro that at all. We have to remember though that behaviour can be seen in women as well. And this is a true story. Had a really close friend's brother who was a lovely guy, soft, gentle fella. And he married the wrong girl, and she was accusing him of beating her and being cruel to her. She went and told the neighbours. Turned out she was actually had psychological issues, and they had to go to court. It was all proven in his favour. He'd actually done nothing wrong. And it was so sad because it broke this man. Really, really sad. So we have to be aware that this works both ways. That will be enough. That will be enough because it will open their mind, So, of course, what I'm trying to get at here as well is innocence is good to protect, but we don't want to promote naivety. And again, this will be really important with the tradition because the tradition can be very based. This is why you can't have a liberal tradition because it's not going to introduce kids to masculinity. And they need to be introduced to masculinity and femininity, yes, of course, but they need to understand what masculinity is in a positive pole. Positive pole does not mean acting like a woman and reading The Guardian. That's basically a sort of gay version of modern masculinity, a feminized version. What they need to be is introduced, if you like, to the fundamental earthy energies. So, of course, the final one to just mention here is they're going to model themselves on what they see in you. Sons will always want the respect of their fathers. It's why you can't actually be too smoochy-woochy as a father. That's the mother's role. She's compassion. You need to be the model he follows, that he looks up to. And he will do that naturally as long as you're not too OTT. But what I mean is, this is where you need to think about, what do I need? What do I need as a man? Well, I think there are very basic things here. You need to be in half decent physical shape. You need to be half knowledgeable about the world. You need to be able to communicate with other people. You need to be able to deal with people that are weaker than you. And you need to be able to deal with people that are stronger than you. And that's going to become the case in different arenas. I once had a lovely story from Jocko Willink, the US military guy. He was talking about, he was at some restaurant and some crazy loon homeless guy walked in and was screaming. And his son was frightened, and sort of stood near Jocko. And if you don't know, Jocko is 6'2", was in the SEALs, been to war, black belt jiu-jitsu, hard as nails, So you can see why his son's hiding behind him. And he said to his son, look, why are you scared? And his son said, well, that man. Well, what are you scared of? Well, he might do something. And he said, well, what's going to happen if he does something? Well, Daddy will do his jiu-jitsu. Yeah, Daddy would. Daddy will protect you. But remember, we don't fear this man, and we're not going to judge this man because this man might be in a bad way and quite sad himself too. So let's just see what happens because we don't have to do anything nasty to this man. Let's just see how he is because he might need some help. Now, in the end, this man left and so on. But I just thought, what excellent parenting. Giving your son the security that he's physically safe because Dad will protect him, but also saying, look, we're not all about violence. If it gets to that, yeah, you're safe. Daddy will stand up. But Daddy's also got a heart. And Daddy's willing to see that fella there's probably struggling. And if he comes anywhere near us, he's going to get one round the jaw. But aside from that, we're going to try and be nice to this person and try and see how we can help first. Again, really, really good parenting, I thought. But I think it also shows another element to that is, in life at times, and as men ourselves, we are going to come up against people that aren't as good as us as something. Well, how do we treat those people? Do we look down on them? Do we mock them? Do we belittle them? No, we try and lift them up if we can. We try and help them out. That's what a good man does. Same time, if we meet someone that's better than us, that's not a complete obnoxious you-know-what, we need to look up to that person and say, do you know what, actually? I mean, this is case in point with me and working out and kickboxing and boxing and all these things I didn't grow up with in the middle classes. I had to be like, look, these guys are more advanced than I am. I've got to humble myself and be like, excuse me, could you show me how to bench press? The first time you go into a gym, I don't know what I'm doing. I found 9 times out of 10, the fellas in gyms, the big bruisers, were all really friendly. They were like, yeah, of course I'll help you. And they'd teach me about form. They'd push me a little bit like, come on, you can do it. Keep going, one more. That sort of thing. And I really enjoyed it. I really embraced it. It felt like I was entering the world of men, And the same with boxing, moving your feet, learning how to punch, guys who've really been in the proper thick of it before, teaching you some stuff. Now, of course, it goes without saying, be mindful here because you don't want to be under the tutelage of someone who's a bully, because again, that's just their own darkness, or someone who is essentially really just weak themselves. It's all right for some guys to take a little bit of ego in it, Maybe some guys got a smile on their face because, they feel good. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. But it's just, just be cautious of the energy that you're letting in. But broadly speaking, I found it to be really, really helpful. I think it's very good for sons to see that because it teaches them the confidence to say, do you know what? I'm actually not that good in this area of my life. Can you help me? Asking questions and being confident enough to is a really, really core skill. But that core skill depends upon them being reaffirmed at their root that what they are is learning, growing, positive, connected, true, and they have a foundation upon which they can stand, which is solid. So anyway, a few ideas I'm throwing out there for being a good trad father in a broken world. I hope some of this helps. Of course, this is a massive part of the 7-step brotherhood initiation I'm about to do. If you do want to be a part of these calls, which are all about that, then do join the Substack, come along to them. They're in the next couple of weeks. Limited spaces as always, so do sign up quickly if you can. Other than that, take care, brothers. We'll catch up again soon.